They talk about the importance of quality control and grading your maple syrup. So Les, take it away. And don't forget to unmute yourself.
Right here, we're unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, then we're good to go. Well, thank you for the opportunity to give this program tonight. It's an honor to be able to work with two universities like Future Generations and Ohio State University to bring you some information about maple syrup production. And so tonight we're going to talk about the science behind grading, how that can help you make quality syrup. And so what we're going to do is, if everything works, okay, we should be, all right, there we go. We're working now. Being able to recognize quality product is the first step to producing a quality product. And excuse me, I got an advance on this that's going to click in once in a while that I had a problem getting a little quirk because of the fact that different PowerPoints that this has been put together from. So I may have to bounce back and forth a little bit, and I apologize for that. But like I said, being able to recognize a quality product is the first step to producing a quality product. And when we talk about maple syrup, we're talking about maple grades, we're talking about maple standards. And that's all about density, clarity, color, and flavor. Now, you're going to say, well, you know, this really seems pretty basic right out, but that's what it is. Making maple syrup is about the basic fundamentals, being able to repeat those fundamentals, because once you produce a good quality product, you want to continue making a good quality product. And it's also about paying attention to detail. Everything you do from the woods, the work you do in the woods, your tubing, everything else is all about detail. It all has to work and work well for you to make a good quality product. USDA standard for maple syrup, I think we're all familiar with it. It's 66 bricks. Let's throw the bricks out and go to percentages, because basically maple syrup solids are 98% sugar. That sugar is sucrose. So when we talk about bricks, we're also talking about the percentage of sugar, because there's only 2% fraction that is other minerals and so forth. Because maple syrup is 98% sugar, the instrumental readings in this case will be considered as a percentage. Some states have a higher lower limit than 66. Vermont, for example, is 66.9. So there is some variation in this standard, but it's still a USDA standard with some variation. There really is not an upper limit. In Vermont, they say it's 68.9 or 69, but in Ohio, we don't set an upper limit. And I don't know whether they do in West Virginia or not, but I know most states don't. Okay. Oops, back up. Okay, what happens when we take a look at a product? What is the consequences if we do not hit 68 bricks? If we do not make a product that is, I'm going to say perfect, because once you hit 66, your maple syrup should be perfect. If it's too light, the density is off on the low side, and you have like 64, 65% syrup, you're subject to fermentation. All of a sudden, you have a product that is not shelf stable. When you have a product that's not shelf stable, that means that if you put it in a store, you can't guarantee that you're not going to have problems with that. So obtaining that 66 brick level is absolutely most important. It is one thing that you have to do, and how you get there. Now, we're show you how you go about doing that. On the other side, we've all had containers that are a little bit on the heavy side, thick side. That syrup has some crystallization in it. There's no penalty for that. I mean, you know, kids love it. Shake it around the bottom of the jug when you get done with your syrup, bounce it off the floor, shake it loose, give it to the kids to as a bonus coming with your syrup. No real problem with that. There's nothing that actually interferes with quality. What we have though is if we have a gallon of syrup and we're selling that gallon of syrup for $50 a gallon, and there's 11 pounds, it should be 11 pounds, and you're putting 13 pounds in that gallon container, you have just given away the price of 2 gallons, 2 pounds of syrup. In other words, you're losing money on that. And so that's something to keep in mind. But I still would think that your customers are the most important when it comes to this, because if they have a tendency to like a little thicker syrup and it retains your customers and it keeps them happy, then I think that probably is not a bad way to go. Syrup density, we look at weight, which I said was 11 pounds a gallon. We don't use weight because they would have to be, in most states, would have to be on certified scales. Hydrometry, we don't use it. We use a hydrometer most of the time, and we'll just talk about that. And then refractometer, refractometry. So now we're going to get into the science and the chemistry and everything in the physics behind this. But the first thing we got to know is, okay, where do we start? We start with a liquid that is 2% sugar. That's our starting point. That liquid is not going to boil any different than water. So that's 212 degrees. The boiling point of water is where you start your boil. 7 degrees above that, 219, you're going to have syrup finished. Sounds easy. Put a thermometer in the thing, watch it, raise it 7 degrees, you got syrup. And not so easy. Got to take another look at this, back up. What happens? Does your water always boil at 212? No, it doesn't. It is subject to barometric pressure. Barometric pressure will determine the boiling point of water. So when you take a look at this at 29.92 atmospheric pressure, you have 212, it boils. But if you're at 28 degrees, somewhere in that area, or 29, it's going to be 210. If you're up at 30, it's going to be 213. So you got to compensate for this some way. To complicate this even more, what happens about the elevation? Have you ever considered the elevation of your sugar house? Well, if you're making syrup at Long Island Sound on the New York coast, and you have a barometric pressure of 29.9 inches, your boiling point of water most likely will be 212, unless you have a low barometer or a high barometer. But if you're making it in upstate New York at 2,000 feet, 29.9 is unachievable. 27.82 is where you're going to be at the average, on the average. Yeah, 29 is achievable on a high barometer day, but not on a regular basis, on an average. And the boiling point is going to be at 208. So 2 factors you've got to consider when you consider using just a thermometer. So what do? You simply go out, you're going to boil syrup on that day. It's very, very easy. You put your thermometer in a boiling pan of water and you check to see where it starts to boil. Once it starts to boil, and of course it's not going to change, because once it's boiling water is boiling water. It's going to be at whatever degree it is. So you check it and you mark that down. In the case of this thermometer, it's got a screw on the back, and you just set that set that needle back to 0, and we're off to the races. Check it a couple times during the day. But I will tell you, there is a lot of variation when you're running an evaporator from the time you start to the time you finish. And that happens quite often. Now, let's take a look at how we're going to really find out what your SERP is. We're going to use a hydrometer, the cheapest, easiest way of determining the density of your SERP is to use a hydrometer. It's a very simple device. It is a device with two scales on it, a Baume scale, a Brix scale. We're not going to talk about Baume. We're going to talk about Brix again. This time we'll use the word Brix for that purpose. But you've got a red line at the top and a red line in the middle. Seems, again, this seems very, very basic. But I will tell you, there's one thing that a lot of guys miss the mark on, and that's 211 degrees Fahrenheit. If you are not above 211 degrees Fahrenheit when you take that test, there can be trouble. And you can see at the right, there's a case where SERP had cooled down. It was sitting off to the side. It was probably 208. And all of a sudden, see where that red line is suspended on that hydrometer cup? There is where a lot of mistakes are made. A lot of mistakes. And it gets even more precise when you get into a situation where you're taking a cumulative draw off and you're drawing off into a draw-off tank and you don't even think about it. You just check that thing and you pour it in there and you pull a sample out of that tank. Well, that's right. But is it? Is the temperature right in that draw-off tank? You might have 5 gallons of SERP in there that you've drawn off 2 or 3 times, or you may have a automatic draw-off that has been running in there continuously. And with modulating draw-offs today and the other equipment that we have, composite samples are very important. I learned that the hard way working with a modulating draw-off the last 2 seasons. You just don't pick it up and pull a sample out there at any one precise time. This thing starts on the low side, it goes to the high side, and somewhere you got to meet the middle. And that's why this is where this becomes pretty important. With hydrometers, you want to make sure you check the accuracy. If you get a chance to have them checked, you can go. A lot of times we do this at the winter meetings. You need to have them stored. They're very fragile. You always want to have 2 on hand in case you break one. And they're in a plastic tube. When you first get that, before you even remove that, take a Sharpie and mark the top of that paper, because this is a paper right here. It's glued to this. Mark the top, mark the bottom, and when you store it and you bring it out next year, first thing you look at, has that paper moved? The other thing is you've got to keep a hydrometer clean. Do not let scale or anything build up on it, because it changes the way that will float, and it might give you an inaccurate reading. That's basically hydrometers. There's not a lot to them, but there is a lot of detail when you take a look at it. Now, when we get down to refractometers, that's another story. Well, everybody thinks, well, this is a good device. I mean, all I got to do is put a sample in there, and it's going to tell me exactly what's happening with this SERP. It's going to tell me exactly what level I'm at. Well, there again, it may not be that simple. Refractometers are designed, and there's 2 of them. There's an analog, and then there's your digital. Refractometers are designed to measure SERP that is a clean, clear sample. In other words, you cannot take hot SERP off of a draw-off that hasn't been filtered, put it on there, and expect to get an accurate reading. Number 1, the heat is varying too much. And number 2, you have a dirty sample. These are refractometers. They work by refracting light and pushing light through, penetrating light through a sample. a very light, like a golden sample, golden delicate, is going to refract more light than a dark, robust sample. Therefore, that's how they work. And so you have to have your syrup filtered, and they have to be at, the temperature should be stable when you do it. Yes, they are temperature compensating, but you still need to have some stability. So, and I think we're pretty good. Attempting to use unfiltered syrup is asking for disaster. The only thing we use our refractometer for in the sugar house is to check the percentage of sugar in our concentrate coming off our RO. It's pretty much relegated to the RO room. We do not use it out there unless we're going to be using canning syrup, and then we double check everything with the refractometer. Let's get down to the thing that we probably enjoy the most and we work the most, and my goodness, I mean, let's face it, maple syrup is all about boiling. It's all about running the evaporator. It's all about having somebody firing up the evaporator and getting sparks to come out the roof and cooking hot dogs in the sap and all that good stuff. Yeah, all that good stuff that leads to poor quality syrup. So, I got to be a real crepe hanger when it comes to this, because when we get down to moving this, we're working through a process here where we are moving sap across the machine, where we're getting 80% of that water out of that evaporator, out of that sample, is coming out on that back pan. That's our flue pan. Then we start into our front pans, and that's about 213 degrees coming across that number 2 there. And at 213, something magical happens with maple syrup. The magic that happens is the color begins to emerge. The flavor begins to be imparted into the liquid. And that happens all the way we go across this evaporator and comes out here, and eventually on this corner of the evaporator with a cross flow evaporator like this, and this probably is a raised flue, you can end up with maple syrup. You can also screw it up starting here and all the way through the process if you do not pay attention to detail. This is where running an evaporator, we all love to socialize in the sugar house and everything else. But I'll tell you, when I'm running a machine where I know that the quality is of the utmost importance, you won't see me drinking a beer. You won't see me being social. I am looking at things on that evaporator. Now, we fire with pellets, so we don't have to worry about opening doors. But if you got a guy firing an evaporator and he's flipping doors open, both of them open at once, and throwing wood in, what happens is he's letting air in, number one. He's banking the fire down with an excess amount of wood, and all of a sudden you got a problem, because then your temperature begins to drop in those pans. Now, as that sap moves across that evaporator, we all know it forms a gradient. And that gradient has to be maintained from start to finish. If we do anything to interfere with that gradient moving across that evaporator, we got trouble. It usually shows up in the form of a big batch. In the worst case, it shows up in the form of a burnt pan. So what we're looking at is we don't want to do anything that's going to end. There's a couple things that can cause that. As I said, firing is one of them. The other one, down in the left-hand corner, foam control. You've got to control the foam on your evaporator. I've seen, I don't know how many times, I've seen guys say, it's foaming up. Just take a can of defoamer and spread it across the whole front pan. What did he just do? He killed the boil on 2/3 of that pan. And all of a sudden, you've got an intermingling of syrup and sap and lower concentration, higher concentration. You don't know where you're at. Well, the evaporator will sort it out, and it may start making syrup in the middle of your pan. that may not be a good thing. You watch that steam and you see that volcano and it almost looks like a tornado coming up out of the front of that pan, you know you got problem. So it's important to put in at a precise time and a precise amount, only in the back corner where the sap comes in. And then you can keep a bottle up front. If it starts to foam when you start to draw off, you can put a drop in there to bring the foam down so that you get a good clean draw off. But this is very, very important if you're going to do that, because what happens is foam will actually pull the liquid up into the foam. It will go ahead and your level in your pans will actually drop. Liquid doesn't mean anything. That's suspended. What's below that liquid is what counts. Now, how do you keep track of that? We keep track of that with the one there in the center. This is called a sight gauge. We have two on our evaporator because it's a raised flue. We have the one in the back, which is set at approximately 1 inch, and we have the one in the front that's set at 2 inches. This is where we guarantee that we're taking a look at that. And if I know I've got 2 inches of sap across those front pans, I know that I've got enough sap in there, enough liquid in there to keep everything moving smoothly, keep that gradient moving across that evaporator. Again, attention to detail is so important. Can't stress that enough. We talked a lot about density. We're going to talk a little bit about clarity. Not going to spend much time on this. I think it says it all. The Ohio State University, you can see it clearly through your bottle. If that's what you're looking at, you have well-filtered syrup. Other than that, it doesn't make any difference how you get to that syrup. How you do it, whether you do it with gravity filters or whether you do it with a filter press, it doesn't make any difference. You just need to get that niter out of there and you get a good clean sample, and that's it. There's no accumulation in the bottom of your jugs, cans, any of that. Now, we're not talking about the crystallization. We're talking about niter and so forth. Niter is pretty important. That's another thing you want to do when you're talking about your evaporator. Keep your niter levels on your pans under control. We got cross-flowing pans. Every day we start with shiny stainless on that front pan that we're going to be syruping off on. That bottom of that pan is as clean as you can get it. There is no scum. There is nothing. We make sure we use 5% vinegar on that in hot water, and we clean that pan down. That's where the vinegar comes in, and that's an insurance policy of keeping that niter under control. Also, anytime you boil syrup, if you reheat it to pack it, keep in mind you're going to have to filter it again. This gets us down to syrup color grades. All syrup is graded by color. So we're going to take a look at, and it also, but along with the color, it is also interrelated to flavor. You can't talk about one without talking about the other. And it doesn't make any difference across the country. You're going to see a difference in the flavor of syrup from Minnesota to the Maritimes, from Appalachians to Quebec. There's always differences in syrup. Syrup from each state and province has a different, unique flavor. Keep that in mind if you're judging a contest, for example, out of your area that you're not used to tasting that syrup. But there again, you really need to know the unique flavor that is associated with each one of those grades, so that you're not being subjective about this. Yes, you like your home syrup, but you really need to pay attention to the fact that if a grade is right, no matter which section of the country it has its own unique, that grade has its own unique flavor. Factors that control the maple syrup are the amount of fermentation product in the sap, the pH in the boiling sap, the concentration of the solids, the time of heating, the temperature of the boiling sap. All these have an effect. The operator can really only control. Originally, they said the only thing you can control is the time of heating and the amount of fermentation products that are present. Not anymore. Concentration of salivary, yes, we can control that because many of us are using ROs. And so RO will increase the percentage of sap sugars in that syrup. It will decrease the amount of boiling time you need to accomplish to move the same amount of liquid through that volume through that evaporator. And therefore, doing it quicker, faster, will end up with lighter grades of syrup. That we know. Will it change the flavor of that syrup? That's debatable. And most of the studies say it won't. But I have people, you know, I've gone round and round on Maple Chat with people that say, swear that they can tell RO syrup. I'll tell you what, I've never had anybody in all the classes I've taught on as far as quality and grading that has ever stood up and said, this is RO syrup. Well, or this isn't RO syrup. So we'll let it go at that. We're out with the old, we're in with the new, and you can see here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this either. You can see that our golden, our low light amber and our golden, back it up, is about the same. We do see a lot of differentiation in the middle grades. The old commercial, which is now the very dark, is pretty much the same. You're going to see that the new amber rich takes on a lot of this best quality of the old grade A dark amber, and we've rolled some of the dark amber into the grade B, and we've come up with the dark robust. And this is the thing that's really good about this is the fact that we now have descriptors, flavor descriptors that go with this. We can take a look at pure maple syrup in this class of golden is light, pronounced golden color, a delicate, mild flavor. What does this tell our customers? This tells us exactly what's in the bottle. Is this a reason to grade syrup? You're damn right it's a reason to grade syrup. You have just made a sales pitch that says, hey, I like a syrup that's got a little bark in it. I want a little bit of a robust flavor. Well, okay, go down here. Pure maple syrup in this class is dark color, more robust, and stronger taste, and so forth. So this will give your customers what they need to know. I think it's probably one of the greatest innovations that we've done in the industry in a long, long time. I'm not going to go into this because like I said, it takes a lot of work to take a 2-hour workshop and bring it down into 35, 40 minutes. But color comparators, I think we're all pretty familiar with these. It's a case of, is this one darker or lighter? You follow the procedure through this. Remember that these are only temporary. They need to be replaced every 2 years. And so when you go through, if you put a sample in the middle, if it's lighter than this one, if it's darker than that, and so forth, you can do it. Again, we go into this in detail in a workshop, but to do justice to this kind of data, I'd have to spend a lot more time. Remember, again, these are temporary kits, and you need to work on it. One of the things you can actually buy today, which is pretty reasonable, is the Hanna Checker. And every one of those, if you notice, had a TC rating on it. Pretty much the same, operates the same way as a refractometer. What you've got is a range of 50 to 75 TC range that you can put the sample in there, read the digital reading, and that's going to tell you whether this is amber. This works pretty good. A little finicky. You got to make sure there's no smudges on the little tubes, glass tubes that you use. You got to remember they're clean. You can't just throw syrup in a dirty tube because it won't be right. It won't be accurate. It will, for some reason, a lot of times it takes a little bit to get them calibrated. But if you're willing to do a little bit of, jock in here and there, they're a pretty good instrument. They're pretty accurate. You usually keep them between 25 degrees Celsius, 77 degrees Fahrenheit, and you operate and keep your syrup in that range and at room temperature, and they work pretty good. Flavor, of course, is the final test. This is where flavors should be representative of the grade. Those descriptors will tell you what that grade is supposed to taste like. No off flavors present. If you detect something strange, you need to back up and take a look at what you might have there. You need to take into consideration, as I said, regional differences. And if you're judging syrup, avoid subjectivity. In other words, you know what you like, but that doesn't count in a judging contest if you're judging syrup. What counts is it representative of the grade that you're doing? Is the flavor there? Is there any off flavor in there? This is where we get into the different things you might taste. And it's a lot like, I always refer it to, it's a lot like sampling wine, tasting wine. If you've done any wine tasting, you know that there's a lot of different flavors that show up in wine. Well, there's a lot of different flavors that can show up in maple that shouldn't be there. But here's the procedure. You examine each sample visually and see if there's anything that doesn't look right. Is it musty? Is it moldy? Whatever. Then you'd smell it. Is there a fermentation or whatever? If not, you can move on to the next, which is the taste. Put some on your tongue, put it on your tongue. Your tongue has the most, your most sensitive for taste, your flavor receptors in your mouth. And eventually, you'll end up, you can probably tell if there's something in there that's not right. It'll have an aftertaste or whatever. And that's kind of what you're looking for. Never swallow a large amount, especially as in strange samples and so forth. This gives you an idea of the different flavors that you can get a syrup, what you might come up with. And again, this is all in the map of maple flavors. It's available online from the University of Vermont. Encourage you to go online and type in the map of maple off flavors, and this will come up. There's also, the off flavors are also in the North American Maple Syrup Manual. There are 3 natural off flavors you need to know. You really need to do that. And it is so imperative that you know these that the University of Vermont Extension has put together this flavor kit for you to taste this. I encourage you for your association to buy a few of these. Let the people taste the difference between these natural off flavors. We'll go to the one that's always my favorite, sour sap. This is the one that is often confused with Buddy's syrup. Oh, geez. Bacteria is the problem, not buds, bacteria. Dirty buckets, dirty lines, dirty tanks. Bacteria is on the move right from the start. You got a 2% sugar season. The sap coming from that tree is sterile. When it comes inside of that tree, down to your tap hole, it is sterile. Once it hits that tap hole, hits the air, then bacteria begins to form. When you get bacteria plus sugar in the sap plus heat, you get darkening. And this causes the darkening of the thing. So this is where you end up getting, this is the formula. You take your sucrose and you get bacteria, you get fermentation, and you got invertase, you got a catalyst in there that goes through this process. All of a sudden, you've got invert sugars that are formed, glucose and fructose. You put in that heat and you get darkening of color and stronger flavor. A lot of people say that strong flavor is a result of leaves of budding. It's not. It is the interaction of bacteria with the sucrose in your sap. The appearance of Sour sap is thick, viscous. The syrup can be ropey. The aroma can be fermented, fruity, citrus in color. Taste will be sour bitter. It'd be like grabbing a hold of a piece of lime. It's very sour. The mouthfeel, after it'll linger in your mouth for minutes, your mouth will get that thick, chunky feel to it. This is sour sap. This is bacteria. This is the reason why your season is shutting down. I'm not saying trees don't bud, but what I will tell you is that 9 times out of 10, what you're seeing is the action of bacteria, not the action of budding. This is what you're looking at. Green sap, that was crystal clear. I ought to probably get a tank. I've got pictures of the tank when we got clear sap in it. That's not clear. I'm looking into a bucket. I can't even see the bottom of this thing. Here's the strainers. It took 4 of them to unload a 300-gallon tank. Okay. Here's the penalty. You started out the season, your trees were going at 2%, 2.1, 2.2. At the end of the season, you're looking at sugar contents of down 1.3, 1.4. What happened? Well, yeah, it had to be the buds are coming out and everything. There may be some of that, and I'm sure Mike was going to go into that, but no. You got bacteria eating your sugar. They're munching away on it, and they're lowering your sugar content. Buddy syrup, you'll know it when you got it. The flavor of it is chocolatey. That doesn't mean anything. When you boil Buddy syrup, when you try to make it, you will get, the smell will drive you out of the sugar house. You will know it. You can take Buddy syrup in on the kitchen, and the family will be wondering what died in the kitchen, because it is bad. There's no doubt about it. You're boiling a vegetative, and I think Mike is going to go into a little bit more of that. When it's over, it's over. But 9 times out of 10, what's killing your season is sour sap and bacteria, not the buds. If you want to know a little bit more about when buds hit trees, we've got the Ohio State phenology calendar. And we know, for example, that silver maple will start to push buds at 35 growing degree days, red maples at 45 growing degree days, and sugar maples up around 100, slightly over 100. And we measure the degree. Here's an example, 45 degrees at the low for the day was 45, high was 75. We add the 2 of them together, divide it by 2, and it equals 60 degrees. We move that from our target temperature, which we almost always use 50, and we subtract that 60 from 50, we end up with 10 growing degree days. And you can watch this accumulation. Here's a teachable moment, approximately the same time of year from 2000, I think this was 2020 or 2019. You see the tree back here? This is this year. Yes, buds came early this year. That's a sugar maple, first part. We very seldom see that. A lot of times we're still collecting sap around the 5th of April. Need to be aware of the fact 185 degrees to can syrup. That's very, very important. You don't want to you don't want fat jugs. You want to make sure you're canning at that temperature. I'm going to get off of here now so that Mike can take over, and he'll talk about metabolism. Take it away, Mike.
Oh, I wanted to give a few seconds if anybody had any questions for Les. Mike is going to talk about the science of some of your off flavors, but if anybody had any quality questions for Les, you can go ahead and write them in the chat as they come to you, or raise your hand and we can unmute you, since we have a fairly small group. I have a quick question for you, Les. We were curious where you find it best to invest your money when it comes to instruments, especially things like hydrometers and thermometers, because some of them can run pretty pricey. And do you find it worthwhile to spend the money on a real high quality thermometer? Or can you get away with this with a KitchenAid or something like that?
It depends on what you're boiling on. You don't need a candy thermometer will do the job on a small rig. But you do need to have it stable, and you do be able to adjust it. Some of those do get pretty expensive, especially those round ones like it was in that picture. The hydrometers are pretty much the same. They're all, I mean, that's a case where they're going to be about $25, $30 a piece. And, like I said, buy two because you're probably going to break one. But I don't.
I see a lot of calibration questions in the Maple chat during the season. And is that
You
something?
ready to go, Mike?
Whenever.
Go ahead.
All
We'll
right.
get the questions at the end here.
Okay.
All right, folks. I guess I'm on. All right, so having listened to Les for the last half hour, we know that some syrup looks like that first bottle, some syrup looks like that second bottle. Both of those bottles can be good syrup. I may like one better than the other. You may like the other better than the one. Both of them can be bad syrup. Okay, there can be problems with either one of those. And that's what we're here tonight with Les and a little bit with me to talk about. Next slide. We found that making good flavored or bad flavored maple syrup depends on you, the person involved in the sugaring operation. As Les finished off with, it depends on the microbes that are growing in your sap and in your sap, okay? And it also depends on the trees. All those help to determine whether you've got that first bottle or the second bottle. Next slide. So my job tonight is to talk about the trees. I like to say that quoting the great environmental classic by Dr. Seuss called The Lorax, tonight I speak for the trees. And we're gonna focus a little bit about the trees and how they impact what that syrup tastes like, if it's good or bad. Next slide. And it all starts off with communications. All right. Ouch, that hurts. Next slide. What we see in this instance is that there's a line of communications. I stub my toe. I send a message to my brain. It ends up in my mouth. And sometimes it's a little coarser and harsher than ouch, I have to admit, okay? And then it leads to some kind of action. I either move the chair so I don't do it again, or I put on a pair of shoes so that if I do stuff, hit the chair again, it doesn't hurt that much. Communications. Next slide. There's the same thing happening in trees. There's communications. There are environmental signals, okay? There are auxins, growth regulators that are basically signals within picking up the signal and then transferring that signal to the various cells of the trees. And then the trees respond to those environmental signals. Not at all that different than what happens in us. Signal, ouch, stubbing your toe, message to the brain, response on my part to move the chair. Next slide. We all know about this. We this is the world of genetics, right? We all know about DNA. Everybody knows about RNA, okay? I got 2 shots of it in the arm. I'm really happy about that, okay? And that RNA, which is a transmitter of a signal, is basically sending a message, is basically telling my immune cells, thank goodness, to make some proteins that will, when come in contact with the coronavirus, start to destroy it. Just a communication system. And another one we have. These proteins, which are auxins are proteins, are made up of subcomponents called amino acids. And we talk a lot about these amino acid signals running through trees. Next. All right. So there are actions that trees have to go through as they get ready to break winter dormancy and move into their summer state. First off, they've got to have a dormancy release. This is based on temperature, growing degree days, based on day length, based on the amount of daylight that the tree is sensing. They've got to hydrolyze starches. That means dissolve starches they've stored into sugars to have the sugars ready for the energy for leaf growth. They've got to initiate root growth. Okay, they got to get their roots growing. They've got to initiate cell division. They got to repair and replace vessels that are going to be necessary to transport water. They've got to absorb minerals from the soil, and they've eventually got to break bud and grow a new crown of leaves. This is all happening during our maple syrup season, okay? And actually our maple syrup season happens because this is all happening. Next. The sensors are in the buds, up there on the tops of the trees. They're in the branches. They're chemicals called phytochromes. They sense light, okay? And they start creating these auxins that move, acids that move on down through the tree and initiate these various coming of spring, moving into summer responses that are necessary for the tree to move from its dormancy state into its full crown and growth state in the summer. Next slide. Okay. Les points out that buddy sap, and I'm going to be talking about buddy sap and metabolism in sap. Those are two responses that we're going to talk about tonight. So buddy sap and buddy maple syrup has this chocolatey Tootsie Roll type flavor. Next slide. There's some work that was done looking at the various complexes of amino acids in sap during the season as it moved through the season. And this is a pretty interesting, pretty complex article that I read a few days ago in preparation for this. But basically, to stay out of the weeds on this one and not get too worried about all the details, it says early in the spring, these little balls over there and that early spring blob, the smaller of the two, they represent amino acids in the sap early in the harvest season. You just tapped your trees, you're getting sap, you're creating maple syrup, and you've got a series of amino acids in that sap, early season sap. And the size of the blob is related to the amount of those amino acids. Late in the harvest season, we're now much later towards the end of the sugaring season, we're into those amino acids present in the large blob there. And we can say, A, there's a lot more of them, okay? B, there are different types of them. We could get into that, but we won't try to go there right now. Lots of them and different types of them made up differently as you move into and through the season. Next slide. And one of the differences in those amino acids is as you move through the sap flow season, as you get towards that end of the season, we get more of these amino acids that have sulfur molecules as part of the sulfur atoms as part of the molecule complex. They got more sulfur in them. All right. Next slide. What do we know about sulfur in the environment? Have you ever tasted sulfur water? You ever been to a sulfur spring? All right. Sulfur in the environment can be, not all the time, but it can be really aromatic, terrible, rotten egg type of smell. If you taste that water, my brother's got sulfur water in his house and it's terrible. It just has got a terrible taste to it. So that sulfur aspects are being added to the sap as you move through the season. As you get towards that buddy stage, that end of the season stage, we're getting a lot of this sulfur into the sap that we're boiling down. Next slide. Okay. What do we know about buddy syrup? Okay. It occurs only at the very end of the season. It tends to be related to dark syrup because for other reasons, dark syrup tends to be at the end of the season, which is related to Les's comments there about microbial action being more intense at the end. It's got a raunchy smell while boiling. As Les said, it'll drive you out of the sugar house. The syrup is obviously off flavor. I mean, you taste it, you know it isn't there. We know that it's got a lot of amino acids that have sulfur in it, okay? As Les said, it's time to quit, okay? It's time to, pack up the sugar in operation and tune up your lawnmower. Summer's here. And it's not good for much, but as I say, giving to your buddy. If you got somebody who's been coming by asking for syrup all season, say, hold on, I'll get you some. Don't worry. You want a gallon? I'll give it to you. Okay. You wait to the end of the season. That's the syrup you give to your buddy. Next slide. Buddy syrup. End of the season, time to quit. Not much you can do about it. I don't think there's anything you can do about it. Metabolism in maple syrup. Metabolism's a different beast altogether. It's got a cardboard type flavor. It's got a popcorny flavor. It's obviously off, and you don't quite know why, but it's just not as good as it used to be. It isn't as good as what I made last year. Okay. Next slide. Metabolism is a word that's got a definition. It's the chemical processes that occur within any living organism in order to maintain life. I'm sitting here drinking a kombucha as I'm giving this presentation. This kombucha's got probiotics in it. I went online, by God, they help my metabolism. So that's good, I think, except metabolism is bad, isn't it? That's our problem. Next slide. Metabolism off flavor. All right. We know that, and I want to give some credit here. We know that metabolism is caused by a compound dimethylprazine, which is an amino acid. And I know that because I read an article, Metabolism Off Flavor in Maple Syrup, Part 1, by Amy Vandenberg, Tim Perkins, Godsell, Lloyd, Mark Esselhart. Okay, these are all familiar names for us in the maple business. They're some of the science folks up out of Vermont, out of the Proctor lab, that do a lot of the work on sap and syrup that helps us understand these processes. So we know what it causes it, dimethylprazine. Good enough. We know that dimethylprazine is aromatic. It's an aromatic and a flavor compound. It's the smell when you fry sesame seeds or roast sesame seeds. It's a smell in peanut butter is due to this. It's always present, it's an amino acid present in the sap all season long, okay? The problem becomes when it becomes in high concentrations. Then we got a problem. We know that it develops during the boiling process, and that in the boiling process, as Les alluded to, you're getting some chemical transformations known as the Maillard reactions. And we know that when dimethylprazine is present in large concentrations, it kind of sidetracks these natural color and flavor developing reactions in your evaporator and gives them a little bit of a not so good flavor to it. We know that when you are boiling the sap, it smells like you're boiling old sneakers. You will recognize this smell, okay, if you ever spent much time smelling old sneakers. It's got this cardboard or woody flavor. Metabolism can occur at any time in the maple season. That light bottled maple syrup I showed you at the beginning, that could have metabolism flavor, off flavor. That dark end of the season bottle, that could have metabolism off flavor. Buddiness, you would never find in the light syrup, but you could in the dark syrup because it's end of the season phenomena. And it can disappear as the season progresses. It can be, you can have metabolism off flavor and then suddenly it's not there anymore, okay? Metabolism can ruin a large portion of the maple crop. I mean, this can be devastating to you if a quarter of your maple syrup you make in a particular year just doesn't taste right. And you certainly don't want to just sell it because your customers, they're used to getting good maple syrup from you. You don't want to give them this stuff. It can't be blended out. I've worked with producers say, well, if you just put a lot of other syrup in it, you won't smell it pretty soon. You won't taste it pretty soon. I've got a producer who made some really nice light maple syrup candy, but it just didn't taste quite right. But it can be reduced through reprocessing, okay? That first article, Metabolism Off Flavor in Maple Syrup Part 1, is followed by Metabolism Off Flavor in Maple Syrup Part 2. And in Part 2, our friends down there go through some processing, reprocessing, that can reduce or eliminate the metabolism off flavor from your syrup. Unfortunately, they require additional boiling, okay, longer times under heat, which result in deeper color and darker syrup. So they do result in a darker grade, but you can, through various processes, and you should take a look at that article, okay? In fact, I recommend everybody spend time at the source of this, mapleresearch.org. There's so much good science and good techniques to help you make syrup better there that I recommend folks spend time noodling around in that. You want to increase your production through your tubing system, or you want to eliminate some of the knitter in your sap. You can do a lot of good noodling around and become a much better maple syrup producer if you do. But it can be reduced, eliminated, reduced through reprocessing. This is good, okay? Unlike Buddy, if you got that sulfur compounds, that amino acids, time to quit. Here, we can do something about it. Okay, next slide. So metabolism flavor in maple syrup. One of the best tree biologists I know, Tim Perkins up there at Proctor, made the statement that it occurs during cold winters without any thaws. One of the best off-flavor syrup tasting or good flavor syrup tasting and grading folks I know is Henry Macris. And he said it occurs after a warm spell. Huh, that's all very interesting. Next slide. So the question is, when does metabolism occur? And the answer to me is that, the trees haven't quite told us yet. I want to end just saying that, trees are wonderful things. Nature is full of mysteries. The trees have not revealed all their secrets to us, metabolism being one of those, okay? And isn't it just fun that we get to go out in the woods as maple syrup makers and work with these wonderful beings, these trees out there in the process of making our maple syrup. I just want to leave you with that thought. What a wonderful thing, what an honor to be able to work with trees in this great process. All right, back to my kombucha.
Thanks, Mike. That was great. We have one question in the chat so far. Keep them coming, guys, if you have questions for these two experts. But this is from Nancy, and it says, we are a backyard producer with 100 taps in Southwest Ohio. This year, we had a finished syrup that filtered a gelatinous substance. What is the reason for this? First time happening in over 10 years.
Your state, Les.
Okay, just read that back through one more time, would you please?
Yeah, so they're in Southwest Ohio, Les, and they had a gelatinous substance filter out this year when they were filtering some syrup, and they were wondering why that happened. They've never seen it before.
Are you sure you didn't tap walnut trees?
Yeah. Yeah,
Any question.
and I think it's in the chemistry of the tree, the year. We're seeing more and more of our niter that, usually niter's just cake, but as you get towards the end of the season, you start to see almost like a jelly form on that, and it gets very, very hard to filter. And again, I think it could be related to bacteria. It could be related to a lot of things, warming of the soil and so forth. Maybe it could be from the fact that it was not as much water in the ground as it was some years We've been pretty dry in Ohio. And so that may have had effect on it. Yes, I noticed that too this year, and we get that, although we didn't have a particularly bad niter in ours this year, but it wasn't the kind of niter that we normally have. And again, I would take a look at what probably ended our season more than anything else was the dry weather. And that changes a lot of things. When you don't have the volume of water in the soil and you're not pulling, you're not pulling those minerals up in the volume of water that you normally do. I don't know whether I don't have a good answer for that, but that might be one of the reasons.
Another reason that pops into my head, Nancy, this is Kate Photos talking, is it might not have been the case with you, but you can also see ropey syrup where some bacteria is added into the syrup after it is finished or due to not fully I had it happen to me where I added some cold sap into boiling sap, and then it didn't actually come up to temperature before I left it for the night. But that will create sort of like a ropey, gelatinous texture to your sap due to bacterial growth. But you can also, it will also spoil the syrup, so it would come with an off flavor as well.
I refer to that as it kind of looks and feels like elephant snot.
Yep. Very accurate, Mike.
That happens at the end of the year. If it was at the very end, I would agree with you, Kate, 100%. It gets to the point where when you're boiling, you can't raise and lower the temperature uniformly on the machine. You'll bounce back and forth between temperatures. It'll run up and down probably 2 or 3 degrees, and it's very hard to get a good draw off, and it's even harder to filter that. And you're getting to the end because the bacteria is beginning to build.
We have another question from John, and it is, what are options for using a natural defoamer?
Okay, I assume that John's referring to organic. Use canola oil, safflower oil, that kind of thing. Do not use peanut oil. Do not use dairy products because people have allergies, and it seems like allergies are getting more prevalent today. So you have to be very careful, but usually those two are what are most often recommended. Remember, in fact, if you're using those, that it does not knock down the foam the same way that defoamer does. It takes more of it. And if you overload with any defoamer, you're going to end up getting that waxy taste that in your syrup, and you're going to have a problem. You're going to get an off flavor with it. So you have to be careful. I ran out of defoamer. I did use some in my foam fighter. I used a canola oil this year, and it worked very well. A lot cheaper than defoamer, and so maybe that's something I might consider using in the future. But that's what your all natural choices are.
There's one other less. The old boys in the Adirondacks in the old days used to beat the foam down with a spruce bough.
A what?
Spruce bough, branch of a spruce tree. They'd whack the top of the evaporator and beat the foam back with a spruce bough.
I could tell you the first defoamer, I never heard of that, but the first defoamer I ever saw was I walked into Sugar House, the old boy I was working with, and I looked up above the evaporator, and there was a bunch of piece of salt pork hanging up there.
I've seen that.
I don't want to tell you the condition of that salt pork, but I will.
Well, that sounds gross and dangerous.
It was gross. First time he turned his back, I ripped that sucker down and flipped it out to the door. Said the dog got it.
Well, what about grapeseed oil? That would be on the list, right?
Grapeseed oil would work, yes.
Yeah.
I like that for cooking. That's very good.
In fact, that's probably a pretty good one because it really has a light to no flavor.
Yeah, that is a very good oil to use, and I think that would be an excellent choice. Yeah.
Hi, folks. Keep questions rolling in if you have them. As we sort of near the end of the evening, we are going to launch a little exit poll, and then also just to better inform us about what future topics to talk about or what future projects to take on as a university. We have a little survey that will actually pop up in your web browser window after the webinar ends. So please take a minute and fill that out for us. It would be really helpful. We would appreciate it. But I'll go ahead and launch that poll. Please feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you if you want to chat with one of our panelists or ask a question over your mic, as well as keep them coming in the chat if you have them. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for your time. And if there's no more questions, we hope y'all have a great night.
Oh, we have a
Yeah,
comment
we do.
on more information on end of the season cleaning.
That is a great idea, John. Thank you. Oh, we have a couple questions in the Q&A. Oh, what was the last oil you said works well? And that would be grapeseed oil. That has little to no flavor and would be a good organic defoamer.
I think you have to use an organic grapeseed oil.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
But all right, folks, I hope you all have a great evening. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you to Les and Mike for having a great talk.